3-2.1.03. Strategy 3. Speaking truth for posterity. The phrase, "speak truth to power," is an old Quaker phrase that has been co-opted by several groups for different purposes. Although it didn't make it into print until the 20th century, its origin is commonly believed to be a 19th century description of an event in 1655, when Quaker activist George Fox was captured and brought before Oliver Cromwell. Facing the threat of death by flames or worse, Fox proclaimed, without fear or respect of person, the truth as he knew it to be. Cromwell, a Puritan and a sworn enemy of the Quakers, was so impressed by this man of faith that he let Fox go free. Twice. Subsequently, the story has become perverted to purvey the idea that Fox spoke truth to power to influence government to do his bidding. Balderdash. Fox had exactly zero influence on the Cromwell government. George Fox almost certainly believed himself to be a dead man talking as he rebuked, condemned, and reviled the murderer Cromwell. The fact that Cromwell's conscience struck him and caused him to act in mercy towards Fox speaks to Cromwell's Christian upbringing and parentage, and not to the absurd idea that, facing death, Fox tried to use the government that he so reviled. The witness of George Fox's life proclaims that any words he spoke to Cromwell were spoken with a full knowledge that he was speaking to the ages, not to some usurper on a man-made throne of blood and gore. Thus we have the key. We must boldly speak truth in the face of power, not to influence power, but to state truth for posterity's sake. Ludwig Heinrich Edler von Mises said, "Do not give in to evil, but proceed ever more boldly against it." Mises could have easily taken the path of Milton Friedman and sold himself into the service of the powers that be, but like Fox, Mises was not that kind of man. Mises boldly spoke truth in the face of power in Austria as the fascist Nazi shadow descended upon Europe, and then he came to America and continued to speak truth even as soft fascism continued to descend upon the earth by way of the fist of Washington, D.C. And so we should learn this lesson. Speak truth, not to influence the warmongering, hate-filled, violent mob called government, but speak to posterity. Speak as if your children and their children are watching and listening to every word you utter. Therefore we speak truth for posterity, not to change government, and not to bring about a free society, and not to convince the naysayers. We speak truth to posterity for the sake of posterity. One fast note about filming police, and then I'll cover this topic more thoroughly later. Filming the police falls under this category of speaking truth if done properly. If you, as an activist, are filming police so that police will be more accountable, or so agencies will hold police more accountable, you are not a friend of freedom. You are a statist. Stop reading this book, go lick the boot of your master, and leave the activism to those of us who know who our enemy is. If, on the other hand, you understand that police are nothing but violent enforcers for their state masters, and their only real job is to kill, maim, cage, and destroy for the purpose of intimidating the general public, then we are on common ground. Eventually, governments on all levels will outlaw the filming of police. Again, more on this later. But before that time comes, documenting the activities of police is a critical aspect of speaking truth for posterity. The only way we can justify the irregular warfare that is about to erupt is if we have thoroughly documented the brutality of police. The only way the rest of the world can know the oppression you face in your neighborhood and in your town is if we film not only police, but every oppressive action of the state everywhere it happens. Filming, recording, exposing, and documenting everything we can document is an act of speaking truth for posterity. This is true in the Americas, in Europe, in Asia, and everywhere governments use their enforcement boot to choke humanity, but is also true in the neighborhoods and villages of Pakistan, Yemen, and other places where governments rain death upon the innocent for the sheer purpose of causing terror and hate while filthy politicians in the West strut around claiming they are bombing for peace. In the future, our generation will be judged based on how we as individuals respond to the vile actions of governments around the world as they murder and maim the innocent in the name of peace. 3-2.1.04 Strategy 4. Agorism. Buckminster Fuller famously said, "You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete." This foundational wisdom is why one person setting up a Bitcoin wallet and using it is a more effective means of fighting tyranny than all the End the Fed websites, books, t-shirts, rallies, and petitions combined. On the other hand, several breakthrough designs that Fuller invested in never caught on in the marketplace because they were crushed by giant government-backed corporations who were deeply invested in the old model. So, as much as I love the genius of Bucky, and as much as I love the innovation of the blockchain, it is simply one wheel on the cart. By itself, it will go nowhere. For Buckminster Fuller's philosophy to actually work, someone must break the violent monopoly stranglehold the state maintains on the market. Despite all of Buckminster Fuller's genius, he never understood that corporations like General Motors, along with the U.S. federal government, would just slap down his new model and continue selling the old model. This is the current situation with blockchain technology and Bitcoin. As revolutionary and inventive as it is, and as valuable as it is in our struggle, by itself it will not produce a free society. It is simply one tool. I should clarify that what I mean by agorism. Sam Konkin said, "The goal of agorism is the agora, the society of the open marketplace as near to untainted by theft, assault, and fraud as can be humanly attained is as close to a free society as can be achieved. And a free society is the only one in which each and every one of us can satisfy his or her subjective values without crushing others' values by violence and coercion." I like that definition. I would add to that, agorism is counter-economics in action. Although black markets are part of the agora, agorism doesn't have to involve black markets. Growing your own veggies, repairing your neighbor's roof in exchange for a motorcycle, or riding that motorcycle without license or registration are all acts of agorism. Driving to Florida, buying a load of oranges from a farmer for cash, taking those oranges to Cincinnati, and selling them by a freeway off-ramp without a permit is agorism. Running a private loan business without permits or permission from government is agorism. I have long been a supporter and practitioner of agorism. It's not easy, and you probably won't get rich, but there is a kind of satisfaction knowing that you're outside of the state system. Full-on agorism has its dangerous side. Every bowman in the woods who refuses to support Prince John runs the risk of being kidnapped by the sheriff. And any time you find yourself in the hands of the state, your situation becomes precarious. State justice involves half-witted buffoons with badges enforcing the random edicts of crony politicians interpreted by judges who are typically failed attorneys lacking the energy, ability, or intelligence to live without the teat of government planted firmly in their mouth. So none of those people can be depended upon to act like predictable civilized humans. Since the vast majority of agorism requires some kind of permanent base of operation, a farm, a compound, a storefront, or even a website, you become a stationary target for the Sheriff of Nottingham to come snorting around looking for a cut of your business. For this reason, agorism requires wisdom and an ongoing balancing act to teeter between full-on fiscal independence and just doing enough to support the agora without landing in a cage. Agorism is not the end-all be-all that some would have you believe, but it is a necessary step in the right direction. By itself, it will never, as Konkin had hoped, starve or bleed the beast in any significant way. If our numbers somehow grew to the point that the state were ever seriously endangered by agorists, government agents would simply label us terrorists, demonize us in the mainstream media, round us up, and cage or kill us. Instead, agorists can play the game wisely. You don't want your children indoctrinated by the state, so you don't send them to government schools. You don't want to feed your family fluoride-infused food and drinks, so learn how to filter your water, avoid mass-produced food and drinks, and eat healthy. You don't want to serve the Federal Reserve or the international banking cartels, so use cryptocurrencies as much as possible and save yourself the cost of outrageous fees in the process. Approaching agorism with this mindset allows us to embrace the counter-economy without deifying a process. A sort of odd subset of agorism is the notion that peaceful parenting will descend upon a generation and bring salvation from our blessed mothers. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying we should beat children. I'm only saying that, again, deifying a process won't bring a libertarian Garden of Eden. Please keep in mind, peaceful parenting is not new, is not a product of libertarian thought, and like other pie-in-the-sky fantasies, provides no actual mechanism of how it will end the state. Peaceful parenting libertarians will never reproduce at a rate so significant that their little angelic wonder children will have any kind of numerical advantage in a world of billions of statist children. Also, in spite of what a certain mind-controlling Canadian salesman purports, peaceful parenting doesn't guarantee peaceful children. I am the father of 3 peaceful adult anarchist children, and I can tell you there are many factors involved in raising children. My father was raised in the hill country of Appalachia during the 1920s and the 30s and was never struck by an adult during his entire childhood. It didn't magically make him a libertarian anarchist any more than my mother was, and she was raised in a violent home where whipping children with a switch was a daily occurrence. By the way, she was one of 12 children, so I will not judge the morality of her parents for using corporal punishment, having never lived in a house with 12 rug monkeys swinging from the drapes. I will only say that as an aspect of agorism, child raising can only take us so far, and then we have to rely on something else to actually kill the state. Otherwise, we hand our peaceful children a world of violence for them to deal with. The oldest and most time-tested version of agorism is escapism. From monks and mountaintop hideaways to prophets leading followers into the desert, escapism is the go-to immediate but temporary solution to state oppression. Escapism is usually the choice writing mechanism used by libertarian and anarchist fantasy and science fiction authors because it's both an easy story to write and to sell. Typically, escapism involves some dynamic personality that the followers rally around, almost always a man with an angelic vision and a huge personality, and a fitting ego. In most cases, this version of agorism ends in one of 2 ways. Either the movement involved gradually becomes irrelevant, or someone in the established state structure notices them and government servants descend upon the outpost where murder and or suicide end the rebels and cultists. Classic examples of the latter group include the mountain fortress of Masada, where some 960 Jewish Sicarii unsuccessfully attempted to evade the Romans, or in modern times, the Jonestown, Guyana massacre, the unfortunate folks at Ruby Ridge, Idaho, and the Seventh-day Adventists at Waco, Texas, who all followed this same escapism to their bloody demise. Needless to say, these methods have been proven to fail miserably at ending the state. The very best results these movements ever produce is a small, isolated group that will eventually vanish through attrition, or the group becomes disenchanted with the dynamic leader and they abandon him to his creeping insanity. The other, less common outcome can be seen in the 1800s Mormon, anti-government, anti-establishment migration to Utah, where the radicalism was gradually replaced by mainstream political leaders. Now, after only 150 years, we see Utah as the seat of the NSA's spy network, and the CIA has found Utah Mormons to be ripe for recruiting into its murderous enterprise. In today's world, we can watch New Hampshire's Free State radicalism quickly being replaced by more level heads, so looking ahead into the future of the Free State, we already see Orwell's Animal Farm working itself out as it did in Utah. Sorry, Snowball, but you and your little radio show are out. The one thing we never ever see from escapism is even the slightest possibility of ending or even weakening the state, but that fact rarely affects the wide-eyed faithful as they follow their great man into the wilderness.